including its next commander-in-chief. Thank you for joining us. I'm Terrence Friday.
I'm Shayna Humphreys. Almost all polls in Michigan are closing at 8 o'clock, but anyone who is already in line can still cast their ballots past 8.
Right now, we wait to see as Michigan decides between a career politician who's been thrown into the race at the last minute or the former president who has spent the last 4 years seeking redemption at the ballot box.
We have team coverage of the presidential race on down, plus analysis here in the studio as those results start to come in.
And we will continue to follow those numbers for you as they continue to come in. We have a team of experts who are here with us as well, who are helping us break down these numbers and everything that's going on. We have a respected professor, Tim Kiska, here with us right now. Tim, what are we seeing as we continue to wait for those numbers to pour in?
Well, a couple things. We're trying to figure out right now the turnout. Is it going to benefit Democrats, Republicans? It's a little unclear at this time. But right now, there are two major congressional races we're looking at. The 7th, which is Alyssa Slotkin's old hit. It's between Tom Barrett and Curtis Hertel. And then the big one, Macomb County plus Rochester Hills. That's between Carl Marlinga and John Jacobs. There was 4 years ago, or 2 years ago rather, it was really, really tight. Both sides have put in a ton of money in this thing. You've probably been seeing a lot of ads, and we'll see how that turns out. That could be somehow, depending on how the presidential race goes, this could influence how that 10th congressional race goes. That 7th, once again, between Barrett and Hertel, those congressional races do not open up very often. It's kind of rare. So there are all eyes on that. You've probably seen quite a bit of that. Oakland County should be coming in fairly soon. Oakland County is, their operation is highly efficient. And so we should start seeing numbers probably within the hour. That should start telling us at least something. And then the numbers come in after that. As opposed to a few years ago when we didn't call this thing until right before noon. This thing, we don't know for sure, depending on how close it would be, could be it before that.
All right, thank you, Tim. Well, the night is young, and as we wait for those results to start coming in, I want to bring in our Carol Kane, the host of Michigan Matters, which airs weekly on CBS News Detroit. Carol, I know you have been covering politics in this state for a long time. What are some of the storylines that really stand out to you tonight?
You know, we've been hearing for months now about the economy. We've been hearing about immigration, the war in Gaza, all these issues which are extremely important. But one thing that has been developing today, the thing I think that people will be talking about tomorrow and after, is women. You ever heard the old adage, there's nothing like a woman scorned? And women have been turning out in force. From what I'm checking with people around the state, different locations, what I'm hearing with that is they're showing up in greater numbers. And in fact, it's clear it's not just about reproduction rights. It's also about Donald Trump talking about Liz Cheney, threats to her, that he's going to be their protector, whether they want it or not. If Donald Trump ends up not winning tonight, and I'm not saying that's going to happen, it'll be women who send them back to Mar-a-Lago. And it's women who are younger, it is soccer moms, it is grandmothers. Women are just teaming up. And speaking of that, we have somebody with us who has been out on the campaign trail here in Michigan and around the country on behalf of fellow Democrats. Pete Buttigieg, great to have you.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having me on. How you doing?
Good. So this is an exciting night here. You have been in Michigan all quarters. You've been with Tim Walz. You've been with Kamala Harris and other candidates up and down here. What are you hearing as the top one or two issues from people when you're out there? What do you think is going to drive voters tonight?
Well, certainly a lot about reproductive rights, as you mentioned. Women and men who care about women's freedoms are fired up about that. That's clearly what brought a lot of people to the doors as I was at those canvas kickoffs. Also, a lot of economic issues. Affordability is something that's on everybody's minds, especially housing affordability. So her housing plan, the difference between her focus on things like a child tax credit and his focus on things like tax cuts for the import tax, that's been a big part of our message. But there's a third thing that I think has been maybe bigger than people realize. I think it's a desire to actually have a chance to put politics back on the back burner. I think it's felt for the last 10 years or so, ever since Donald Trump came onto the scene, that politics has been in our face all the time. We've been at our throats all the time. And I think there's a hope, even from some of the Republicans who crossed party lines to back Kamala Harris this time, that maybe this could be a step toward getting on
If
back
I
from
could
the
interrupt you two here for a second, I had an interview with Donald Trump about a year and a half ago as he was gearing up for this. Number one thing he talked about was EVs, the fact it would cost the state jobs, it would cost the state monies. And I know you have been out going around the state. Have you heard much about EVs and concern from voters about that and who they're going to vote for?
Definitely in terms of television commercials and pieces of mail. But when I'm actually talking to voters, usually if I talk to anybody who's directly been affected by EVs, it's a union worker in the building trades who's working on one of these factories, or somebody who's working in one of those factories, hearing about projects like the Lansing Grand River Assembly, just to take one example, and the jobs that that's creating. But, definitely a lot of work that I think my side needs to do to clear up some of the myths that are being pushed around EVs. Make sure people understand that nobody's car. There's no mandate. But what has been important, and what she's trying to do, is to make sure that this new technology, America, because you see China really pushing to take the lead in EVs, and they're not doing it because they're big environmentalists over there. They're doing it because it's a smart economic strategy. We want America, not China, to be dominating that technology of the future.
There's a lot of anticipation over what's going to be happening as the votes are counted. One question that's going to be asked is, what's next for Pete Buttigieg? I know Politico had a story about you. If Kamala Harris wins, maybe you're one of the contenders for Secretary of State job. Anything to say to that?
Not really. I know there's a lot of speculation there, but right now, I have a job. I love my job. And when I'm not doing that job, then I'm doing what I can on the political side to help great leaders like Kamala Harris and Alyssa's elected. The election I'm focused on is the one that's today. I'm not on the ballot, but I'm supporting a lot of great people who are. And then we'll see what the future holds.
We're out of time. I don't get a chance to ask you about would you consider running for governor as that job is open. We'll leave that alone. Wait for you to come with us in studio next time you're back in the Motor City. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Great being with you.
Okay,
Have a good night.
guys, back to you.
Carol, thanks. And Michigan voters also have the ability to tip the balance of power in the Chamber of Congress. Here's a live look at where that balance currently stands. We expect this scale to update throughout the night. We'll be bringing you those numbers as those numbers continue to update throughout the evening.
Let's go back to University of Michigan Dearborn professor and pollster Tim Kiska. Of course, one of the big races tonight, the U.S. Senate race in Michigan between Mike Rogers and Alyssa Slotkin. This could have major implications on that Senate control. Tim, do you think if Rogers wins, that essentially seals the deal for Republicans?
The answer is yes, because West Virginia right now is in Democratic hands. I'm not sure it's already been called. It might have been called already. For the Republicans. They need to get 2 seats. So they're pretty sure on West Virginia. They just need 1 more. They're putting a whole ton of money into Montana, and obviously they're putting a whole ton of money here in Michigan. A couple things. The Republicans have not elected a U.S. senator here in 30 years. 30 years. That's a long time. And I think they're looking for a pickup. The other thing is that U.S. Senate seats don't open up that often. Kind of rare. Carl Levin was here for 6 terms. I think Debbie Stabenow for 4. It's going to be big. So thanks. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Tim. Let's bring in Oakland University professor Dave Dulio now, who's joining us. Major stakes tonight. We've seen a lot of issues front and center in some of these races. National security, the war in Gaza. What are you watching out for tonight?
Well, I think all of those issues are going to really impact some key constituencies here in Michigan. And the Arab American vote, for instance, has gotten a lot of attention, and rightly so.
Yeah.
So we know that it goes back months to the Democratic primary when uncommitted got a protest vote against still President Joe Biden, but then candidate Biden. And that opposition has carried through to Kamala Harris's candidacy. So I think if we look at those key areas, those key cities, Dearborn Heights, Hamtramck, in 2020, those 3 communities delivered 73,000 votes in the presidential race. And Joe Biden won those votes 71% to 21%. It'll be very interesting to see how the issue of the war in Gaza has affected voters in those 3 communities, whether they turn out to vote at all, because there have been calls for those residents in those communities not to vote for either of the major party candidates, or if we see some significant shift toward Trump, when significant in this case could be 10, 15, 20%.
Yeah, and that was 100,000 voters in the primaries
Correct.
earlier this year. It could have a major impact.
Absolutely.
We'll see what it translates to. Thank you, Dave. I think we're going to go to our Kelly Vaughn now, who is in the Dearborn area talking about just this. There's some candidates doing some outreach to Arab American voters. What's going on there, Kelly?
Well, the big point people here are telling me, this gathering here tonight, it's not a celebration. It's a gathering of community, despite, as I heard you guys talking about, many of these people here all voting very differently. They say this election is sensitive for them. I heard you guys talking about 2020. Of course, Biden won the election handily here in Dearborn, 3-1, but the Israel-Hamas war has changed everything for these voters. Many of them say they are angry with how the Biden-Harris administration is handling the war. Now, I spoke with the owner here at the canteen that's holding this community gathering. He says it was important for him to be able to gather and have a nonpartisan community gathering for everyone in their community.
I don't blame anybody for their feelings. You know, some people just want to punish the Democrats and they don't want to vote for Trump, and they're getting blamed for that. I don't blame them. Some people are scared about Trump. They're going with Kamala. People like myself voted third party just to make a statement. I don't blame anybody. We don't judge anyone for their stances.
And speaking with people here tonight, they all have different plans for how they're going to vote, or they all had different plans for how they're going to vote, but they said that's not going to keep them from gathering here and focusing on their true number one cause, and that's, of course, ending the Israel-Hamas war. Now, the group here gathered tonight, they're watching the election results roll in, and they're also having speakers address the crowd. And they say, interestingly enough, this might be one of the few rare places in America where people are coming together as a community despite all having voted very differently. We're now reporting live in Dearborn, Kelly Vaughn for CBS News Detroit.
All right, Kelly, thank you. And David, as you've mentioned, we are one of the largest Arab American populations in the country. So this has been an important part of the campaign trail for both sides, and they know that they need to reach those voters.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think, no better example of the attention that's been paid to that community than Donald Trump stopping in Dearborn last week, Friday. In one of his last campaign stops, we're going to stop by, talk to some voters there, talk to a small business owner. That's never happened before, right? I mean, I think that really signals the outreach that the Republicans have tried to do, at least here in Michigan in that community.
Yeah, what about on the Democratic side? You know, we've seen some interaction between the Harris campaign and between the Arab American community, but it seemed to sort of stop short. I don't know that the vice president fully embraced and really worked for that endorsement. Do you think she did, Tim?
Well, I think she did what she could do. She can only go so far. I'm sure what Dave would say, but she's still working for Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. And so that's a fact. What are you going to do with that? But right now, I think what's different about this thing is I think that the Arab American community, they're standing up and saying, we're here, we are a serious voting bloc, and we're not to be taken lightly. And believe me, I think the Democrats have heard that, the Republicans have heard that, and I think message delivered loud and clear. That 100,000 uncommitted voters in the primary. One thing politicians know how to do is to read numbers.
Yeah.
And the 100 thing, I would like to be a fly on the wall when that number came over. And
right.
Whoa.
Well, we'll see just how loud and clear at the end of the night. We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us as America decides. We will have the latest on the big races and more on what is at stake tonight after a quick break. Welcome back. Much like the presidential race, a number of polls have Michigan's U.S. Senate race between Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin and former Congressman Mike Rogers within the margin of error.
The race could be decided by split ticket voters who vote based on the candidates and not just their commitment to a particular party. Both former Representative Mike Rogers and Representative Alyssa Slotkin are hoping to fill the retired seat of Debbie Stabenow.
We've been following this race very closely. Our Jack Springate is with the Rogers campaign and Lauren Winfrey is with Slotkin's team. Jack, we'll start with you. How is Team Rogers feeling tonight?
Well, we're still on the lookout for Mike Rogers, but we are the center of everything GOP here in Southeast Michigan, here at the Suburban Collection Showplace here in Novi. And this is unlike Dearborn. You're seeing a lot of people here who have voted for the same candidate, and they're gathering here for what they're calling, optimistically, a victory party. Now, candidates from the U.S. House races, 3 U.S. House races, and 1 candidate from U.S. Senate will be here tonight along with Team Trump. Republican voters have been closely watching some of the numbers come in, and you'll hear a round of applause every once in a while as they see Republican candidates in other races across the country take big leads in those races. We've talked to several Trump voters here and asked them why they feel optimistic about a second term for Donald Trump. And we'll be introducing them to you shortly as we continue our coverage here from the Suburban Collection Showplace in Novi. But for now, I'll send it back to you two in the studio.
All right, thank you, Jack. Our Lauren Winfrey is at the Motor City soundboard with Team Slotkin. Lauren, what's the latest there?
Well, Shayna, talk about optimism. We just heard a round of applause. We looked at the numbers, and Slotkin was in the lead. And this is, of course, such a tight race between the two, and one that is very heavily watched because this could determine a sway of power in Washington, D.C., because this race might decide who holds on to the Senate majority. And in this election, Democrats are defending more seats than Republicans. Also, we're watching the 12th Congressional District, incumbent Democrat Rashida Tlaib trying to stave off challenger James Hooper. So this is the place for Democrats, and they will be watching, rooting for their candidates all across the state, obviously the top of the ticket as well. But when you talk about optimism, that's what people are feeling in this room as more and more people pour in to watch those results pour in as well. I'm going to send it back to you all in studio, but for now, reporting live in Detroit, Lauren Winfrey, CBS News, Detroit.
All right, thank you, Lauren. Now, both Slotkin and Rogers bring some strong national security credentials to the table. Slotkin, a former CIA analyst who served 3 tours in Iraq. Rogers is a former chair of the House Intelligence Committee.
David Dulio is here to talk with us, professor from Wayne State University. Thank you for your time. I know this is a busy night for you too, so we appreciate it. We've seen both sides of these campaigns getting some heavy hitters getting behind them. Donald Trump backing Rogers and former President Barack Obama getting behind Slotkin. Do you think those campaigns have been effective so far?
They have been. I think it's been a knockdown, drag out really since the start of the election cycle. It was a pretty clear Slotkin-Rogers matchup from the beginning. And in addition to the heavy hitters, personalities that have come in to campaign for these candidates, the amount of money that has been spent here is just astronomical. I mean, it is just in the hundreds of millions of dollars range, and it's we'll see. It's going to pay off for one of them at the end of the day.
All right. Thanks so much, David. We'll check back in with you soon. And as Michiganders know all too well, the state is one of the top prizes in the race for the White House. The candidates have been here repeatedly over the last several weeks.
So let's go back to our Carol Kane. Carol, what are some of the things that you're hearing about the local party leaders concerning those races?
Well, certainly at the top of the ticket, we're talking about the U.S. Senate race. That is just huge. You've also got the 13th congressional seats going here. There's just so many different things going on. But I think one issue, the straight party ticket voting, is going to influence a lot of this, too. A lot of people, and I don't know what percent it's going to break down to this time, pull the Republican or Democratic lever right down the place here. But, boy, lots of questions here. And speaking of people who may have some answers for us, and that is Pete Hoekstra, who is the state party chair of the Michigan Republican Party. Pete, how are you doing?
I'm doing very, very well. Good to be with you, Carol.
Good to be with you, too. Boy, you've had a long day. You started about 2:30 this morning with Donald Trump up in Grand Rapids, your neck of the woods here. We've had people voting now. And how do you feel about how the top of the ticket is doing in our state?
We're very, very bullish. We're very optimistic. The numbers that we're seeing in terms of turnout, where those voters are coming out, give us a lot of optimism. I saw that a Senate race that some people were watching on a national level, the race of Rick Scott in the state of Florida. I see that has already been
Right.
called for Senator Scott. That's a good start to the night.
Yeah. Well, as you're watching Donald Trump, he's certainly been in Michigan a great deal, as has Kamala Harris. I mean, Michigan has been a regular stopping ground. Makes you wonder if we'll see these candidates, whoever wins, ever comes back to Michigan after all of this. But what do you think has been the defining issue in this race?
Well, I think it's really in Michigan, it's been the economy, it's been inflation, and it's also been the huge debate in the automobile industry about electric vehicles, government mandates, and those types of things, and the future of the automobile industry right here in Michigan. I think, I've been working on that issue for the last 18, 19 months, fighting the electric vehicle or the electric battery plants, up in Green Township, and
Right.
also.
And Pete, I know we've got much more to say about it here, and we're out of time because I was going to ask you about the fallout from Donald Trump, the Detroit Economic Club, dissing the city. But you know what? We're out of time, so you don't have to answer that question. We'll get you on Michigan Matters to talk about it. But thanks so much for being with us.
We'll look forward to covering the election results with you soon.
All right.
Hey, thanks,
and guys,
Carol.
sending it back to you. Take good care. Sending it back to you guys.
All right, thanks, Carol. We'll be watching Michigan Matters for those answers. And stay with us tonight as we continue our election night coverage. As America decides, we'll have the latest on those races for you that matter to you. We have to take a quick break. We'll be right back. This is CBS News Detroit's election night coverage as America decides its next president of the United States and the balance of power in Congress.
The polls are now closed across most of Michigan. A handful of counties in the UP that are on Central Time are still voting, but results are just starting to trickle in. We have reporters spread out across the area to bring you the latest developments throughout the night.
That includes our Terrell Bailey, who is joining us now live from Huntington Place, where Detroit's ballots are being counted. Terrell, what are you seeing?
Yeah, hey there. Good evening, guys. We did just get an update from the city's election director on the ballot counting process here. He ultimately said overall it's been a smooth process when it comes to counting those absentee ballots. He says around 92,000 of them have ultimately been counted. If you take a look behind me, you can clearly see election workers slowly but surely making their way counting all of those different ballots. But let's go ahead and take a listen to some other things that the election director had to say.
Yes, we're on pace for having everything counted tonight. Obviously, the early votes will be coming in first. Absentees, the first 8 days, will be coming in second. All of the precinct returns will probably be here by 11 o'clock. And then finally, we'll have our election day returns for the absentees.
Ultimately, we do know Michigan has 15 electoral votes. Of course, as the night rolls on, we will see ultimately which candidate, in fact, gets those votes. But for now, we're live in downtown Detroit. Terrell Bailey, CBS News, Detroit.
Yep, those results starting to come in. Thank you very much, Terrell. Of course, we are keeping our eye on a number of important races in the state, with 1 U.S. Senate seat and all 13 U.S. House districts on the ballot.
But with Michigan a key battleground state in the race for the White House, the eyes of the nation are waiting to see if voters pick Vice President Kamala Harris or former President Donald Trump. Let's bring in University of Michigan Dearborn pollster Tim Kiska. Tim, what areas of Michigan are you keeping a close eye on as we wait for those numbers to keep coming in?
Well, first of all, Oakland. And Oakland's coming in pretty heavy right now. Oakland's a big deal. 4 years ago, there were almost 750,000 votes in there. And it went to Joe Biden by 14 points. He improved on that from 8 points 4 years earlier under Hillary Clinton. So Kamala Harris needs Oakland County. Now, here's where we are right now. Now, one thing I want to caution you on, 31%, it's kind of like watching a football game, and it's like maybe the first quarter. But that's where we are. Things could change drastically before the end of the night. Right? 60% to 40%. Back to you.
Thank you, Tim. As America decides, we are bringing you results and analysis throughout the night.
Our local election special continues after this break on the stream. Welcome back. There are several congressional races that we're watching tonight.
We're going to do a quick run through of a couple of those as numbers start to pour in. Incumbent Representative Debbie Dingell is facing GOP challenger Heather Smiley in District 6 to keep her seat. Right now with just 6% of that vote in, so it is very early. Dingell's ahead with 60.5% of the vote.
And in Michigan, District 9, up in the thumb, Democrat Clint St. Mosley is pushing against incumbent Lisa McClain. We see there 8% of the vote coming in. Again, those numbers are coming in as we speak, so we'll keep watching everything for you and bringing you updates as we get that information in real time. Argento Vici and Alicia Bergio are on your block in Novi and Warren, tracking District 10.
This is a very big race, highly competitive one, and a rematch from just 2 years ago. As we wait for numbers in this race to start coming in, Alicia, what are you seeing from Carl Marlinga's watch party tonight?
Shana, Terrence, good evening to you both. Tonight, Democrat Carl Marlinga, who is running to represent Michigan's 10th district in Congress, will soon be joined on stage by UAW President Shawn Fain and other leaders of the United Auto Workers here in Warren. Now, the UAW is backing Marlinga for his support of the Michigan auto industry. And as you can see right behind me, things have not quite gotten started yet, but you can feel a sense of optimism in the room right now. Now, 2 years ago, Marlinga lost to incumbent Republican John James by a mere 1,600 votes in a close neck-and-neck race. Now, he served 20 years as Macomb County prosecutor and nearly a decade as circuit court judge. Now, the polls closed at 8 p.m., as we mentioned, and we, of course, will keep you updated with the latest results as soon as we get them. But for now, I'll send things back to you. Reporting live in Warren, Alicia Bergio, CBS News Detroit.
Thanks, Alicia. Let's head out to Gino Vici now, who is in Novi following the Marlinga campaign. What's the latest there, Gino?
Well, Marlinga, and then I'm covering John James. But one thing we haven't seen yet tonight is John James. We have repeatedly reached out to his campaign during this election cycle, but have been unsuccessful. He has not been spotted here at the Republican headquarters here at the Suburban Place in Novi. Now, interesting thing about this rematch, the 10th district was actually reformed last year, which impacts parts of Macomb and Oakland County. Now, that could have an impact, but to what degree, that is yet to be seen. Now, generally speaking, Republicans do better in midterm elections, lower voter turnout, but it'd be very interesting to see how things shake up this year being a presidential election cycle and how that will impact this race. John James, the incumbent, has focused his campaign on border security, veterans' health being one himself, the economy, and education. But we're really going to see what this race looks like with a higher voter turnout this time around. And the numbers are very low right now, too close to call. But right now, John James does have a lead of 60% to about 35%. Marlinga, again, only a few thousand votes counted. But will he have enough lead to win this? We'll know in a few hours. Back to you.
All right, thanks, Gino. And in District 13, we are watching Democratic incumbent Sri Thanadar as his race continues against GOP Congressman Martell Bivings.
Our Al Myers is in Detroit following that race. Al, what can you tell us?
Hey guys, the race for Congressional District 13 will be an important one to watch as we see how the balance of power shakes out in D.C. Congressional District 13 is in Wayne County. It covers portions of Detroit and Metro Detroit. Now, Congressman Sri Thanadar has represented the people living in those areas since 2023, and it has been held solidly by Democrats since the 1940s. Thanadar is being challenged in this race by Martell Bivings, a Republican hoping to flip that district red. According to his campaign, Bivings is running to improve immigration, cut inflation, and provide tax breaks for existing homeowners. Thanadar has served on a platform of combating poverty, improving fair labor practices, and improving education. The polls are now closed, but the two men are hoping Detroiters and Metro Detroiters have heard their messaging. Now I'll have some from Thanadar and Bivings later today. I hope you'll stick with me, guys.
All right, thanks, Elle. We're going to continue the conversation with our panel of experts, David Giulio and Tim Kiska, Again, thank you both for being here with us this evening. David, what are you thinking in terms of these races that we're also watching and the fact that this could also have a big shift in the balance of power and how things move forward in the state?
Most definitely. The House of Representatives has a really thin majority right now, 220 Republicans, 212 Democrats. So Democrats, in their effort to take back control of the U.S. House, need to flip a few seats. Republicans are looking to expand that majority. I think we've got 3 races here that are competitive. The 10th that was mentioned before, John James and Carl Marlinga in a rematch of 2022. And then we've got these 2 open seats, a Lansing-based district, Tom Barrett against Curtis Hertel. Really 2 strong candidates on both sides. That's going to be close. And then in the 8th Congressional District, Flint-based district, Senator Kristen McDonald-Rivet against Paul Young. Again, 2 pretty quality candidates. Probably going to be close, maybe not as close as that one in Lansing, but Michigan could be a majority maker here. When we think about, if Democrats hold both of those 2 and then Marlinga pulls off an upset of John James, well, that contributes to the Democrats' ability to flip that Senate seat that House majority. And then on the Senate side, that Rogers-Slotkin race could also be a majority maker. As Tim mentioned, if Republicans win that one, it's really strong possibility that they are going to have the gavels in the U.S. Senate.
And in District 10, an upset wouldn't take much from the Marlinga campaign. It was so close 2 years ago, Tim.
Exactly.
And now there's a lot more support behind Carl Marlinga than he had from the National Party.
A lot of money. As I mentioned before, 2 years ago, the Democrats kind of wrote it off, and then at the last minute, they're going, wait a minute, we can nail this thing. It didn't work, but they're not making this mistake this time. As you can see, just turn on the TV, how many ads, some from John James, some Carl Marlinga, both, accusing each other of everything, tooth decay. That was the other guy's.
Sure.
He did that. So you're going to see a lot of that. I think, once again, as Dave mentioned, the old Slotkin seat, who knows how that's going to turn out. I have a feeling that the presidential race is going to influence a whole lot of this. Mm-hmm. If Donald Trump, pulls out a big number, I think that's going to really help those congressional seats. Vice versa for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, and is it just straight down the ticket voting? I mean, Donald Trump, we're talking in the U.S. Senate race about a Mike Rogers, who is not exactly a Donald Trump-style Republican. He's from a previous generation. So do you think support for Trump is necessarily support for someone like Rogers?
I think it's really interesting to look at the polls that we've seen, right? I mean, it's been neck and neck. I mean, just razor thin in that presidential race. Yet Alyssa Slotkin has had, I'd say, a consistent advantage over Mike Rogers by a handful of points. Nothing crazy, but she's been ahead, I think, the whole time, right? So that's either there are some Trump Slotkin voters, which is a little curious, or that there's just some what you might call ballot fall off or ballot roll off, where folks just aren't, they're going to come out for that presidential race, but they're not going to vote down the ballot. And that makes sense the way some Trump voters are, right? They are for Trump a lot of times before they're for Republicans, right? And I think that that's an interesting thing to keep an eye on right now.
Yeah,
So many
there's a lot to
interesting
watch. Yeah, for sure. Gentlemen, thank you. We have to take a quick break, but we will be right back. Our America Decides coverage continues after this. The Michigan Department of State is working to make sure that this election is secure. They're giving updates throughout the day and evening on voter turnout and election integrity.
Our Meredith Bruckner has the latest numbers from Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson's office.
Here are some of the latest figures provided by the Michigan Department of State. At last check, they've reported more than 3.4 million total returned ballots. These are both absentee and early voting ballots. This represents about 46.6% of active registered voters in the state of Michigan. Now, of that number, more than 2.1 million are absentee ballots. The Department of State also says more than 16,000 same-day voter registrations have been recorded so far today. As of 11:40 this morning, that figure was just over 3,700. Field and ground teams are reporting solid, steady operations at the polls today with no major issues. Some other stats from the Department of State. As of Monday, 55% of voters were women and 46% men. During the last election in 2020, that figure stood at 51% women and 48% men. A total of 5.6 million votes were cast in Michigan in 2020. 3 million of those absentee. The Department of State is hoping to break records on this election day. Back to you.
Thank you, Meredith. Let's head back to Carol now in our little mini spin room. Carol, I know you've been talking with people on both sides of the aisle, and you're joined by a couple now.
We have a couple different opinions here about what's going on tonight here as we're joined by Detroit City Councilman at Large, Coleman Young II. And on the other side, Lena Epstein, Vice Chair of the Michigan Republican Party, the Finance Chair. And let's talk about the top of the ticket here. Both of the candidates, Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, their subordinates and everybody else and surrogates in the state on a regular basis. Coleman Young, let me ask you first about polling and concerns about Kamala Harris, particularly with young black voters, young black male voters, and being able to up. Apparently, she has been making inroads, but is it enough?
Well, first of all, Carol, always good to see you. Looking great, by the way. Always good to be here with you. Listen, first of all, let me just say, overwhelmingly black people are going to vote for Kamala Harris. We're not a monolith, but there has been some concerns in the margins. We've seen some numbers that have been like 20%, 19%. I don't think that's going to materialize. I think there's a better chance to find a Loch Ness Monster in the bottom of the Detroit River, but we'll have to wait and see. And I think that's what a lot of people on our side are concerned about. So we're concerned.
So, Lena, Donald Trump has been in Detroit numerous times. He was at the Detroit Economic Club. We know he talked about the city. We'll leave that alone and whatever. But the fact is, he's been into Detroit a couple different times here. Do you think he has a shot at peeling away some of those voters?
Oh, I certainly do. I think that the people that are from Detroit want options. They want choices. I think President Trump has presented a phenomenal economic package, a package for safety for the nation, addressing economic concerns. And I think this is what all voters across the state of Michigan are looking for, including the city of Detroit, but not limited to the city.
And Coleman, the Dems dove headfirst into the whole issue of reproductive rights,
Yes.
As far as, that was the calling card for Kamala Harris and other candidates here. And she had a big event in Ann Arbor, kind of wrapping things up last week. How much impact do you think that topic is going to have?
Oh, it's going to be huge. I mean, I remember in the midterms elections, that's really what got us over the hump, was women coming out and saving us. The core of the Democratic Party is women, particularly black women.
Yeah.
The government has no business underneath women's clothes, in my opinion. I think they feel the same way. I think they're going to turn out like that.
And I know you probably feel differently.
I do. I think the pro-life community is very robust in the state of Michigan, very well funded and very eager to ensure that Donald Trump wins. I think that women have been paying more attention to this election than ever before because of these issues. And I think we're going to come out in droves to support Donald Trump.
Curious what you make of Melania Trump, Donald Trump's wife, who broke ranks with her husband in the party and made a video, My Body, My Choice, on this whole thing and taking the opposite sides. Kamala Harris has been getting lots of support from Republicans, again, over the issue and what Donald Trump has been saying about women here. What do you make of that?
Well, Melania Trump isn't running for president. Her husband is, so she's entitled to whatever view she'd like. Ultimately, President Trump wants the power to rest with the states. The people have voted, and the issue of reproductive freedom does rest with the states.
I think Melania Trump wants to be a Democrat. I think she wants to vote for us, and we have more than enough space for her. And I think she wants to send her husband home, and we want to support her in her efforts.
She loves her husband. She loves her husband and wants him to win desperately.
And I know that, Lena, you and I have talked often through the years. You've been a Trump supporter from the get-go. Literally 2015, you were one of the first people I knew in the whole state who came out actively and supported him. As you've seen on this, particularly in this campaign, and what he's been saying on the campaign trail, we don't need to belabor all what he said. He has said some very outrageous things, to say the least. Have you ever had a chance, and I know you've been around him numerous times, to talk with him about what he's saying or get to people to get him to tone some of that rhetoric down?
Donald Trump is Donald Trump. The man is the man. In his late 70s, we are who we are. I think that Donald Trump has his particular style. Some people like it, some don't. I love that this man is willing to stand up to our global enemies and say whatever is necessary to protect democracy and freedom in this country. He is bold and unapologetic in who he is, and I accept him for who he is and what he says.
Regardless of what happens this evening, should he win, should he lose? Let's take a conversation. What happens to the MAGA movement after, if let's just say for the sake of discussion, he's
the
not
MAGA movement is
successful?
very strong, and I think we're going to be successful tonight. But whether we win or not, the MAGA movement is here to stay. As the finance chairman of the party, I can tell you that people are coming out in droves, new supporters, old supporters. It's very, very invigorating and encouraging as we await the election results.
You think we'll know the results tonight?
I hope so. I mean, I know in Detroit we'll know by 12 p.m. by midnight. They said they'll probably take us till mid tomorrow for us to know the results. I hope it's quicker than that, though.
It's going to be a late night. In 2016, it was 3, 4 a.m. by the time we got to our car, so we're expecting a late night tonight as well.
Harris victory. I'm confident.
Thank you guys so much for being here. Great conversation. I appreciate it. We'll have Michigan Matters coming up here soon. And guys, we're sending it back to you.
All right, thank you, Carol. And it probably will be a late night. We expect that on these big nights. Most polls in the state have been closed for almost an hour now. We're back at the desk with Tim Kiska, Dave Dulio. It's interesting, though. I think a lot of people are expecting that we're going to be on the edge of our seats, maybe for days, maybe weeks. Some people are saying more, but this is a different ballgame than it was 4 years ago. We've had a lot of people voting early, voting absentee. Many of those votes have already been counted. So do you think it's necessarily going to be hours, days, weeks before we know?
I mean, it could, right? I mean, just because of the closeness of the race. And I think, another way to think about it is at the presidential level anyway, the electoral college margin is an entirely different beast. So it could be that one of these candidates sweeps through these swing states and gets all of them. In that case, we will have a confident answer about who the next president of the United States is going to be pretty early. But if each one of them remains razor thin and the counting has to keep going, some states even have to count ballots that they receive in the days after Election Day, then it might be several days or a week.
Yeah, and Tim, of course, we are a swing state, narrowly going to Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton back in 2016. So a lot of eyes are on us. And like you said, it could go either way tonight.
Oh, absolutely. 4 years ago, they called it a little bit before noon the day after Election Day. I remember looking around from Macomb County. I think I got it about 10 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday. And then the final projection was not made until a little bit before noon on Saturday. I think that because you can count votes earlier now, I have a feeling, I think I'm with Dave here, I think, or Coleman Young said, we could have a lot of stuff in by midnight, a whole lot. And in terms of projections, AP's will not project a race until the trailing candidate has no mathematical possibility of getting to number one. When is that going to happen? Well, if I knew that, or Dave and I knew that, we'd be the smartest guys in the world.
You are some of the smartest. That's why we've got you here tonight. So if we zoom out a little bit, for people who are desperate for some answers, some results anywhere, David, where are you looking in the country? Are we starting in the South, the East, where polls are just closed earlier?
I would start with North Carolina and Georgia. I think if we can look at those two states, and if just because the polls closed a bit earlier, right? If we see a trend in either of those states that maybe favors Trump or favors Harris, I think then we might be able to read into it a little bit. But at the same time, each state's going to be different, and the constituencies that we talked about before, the results here are going to be all about the margins. And Tim's going to go to the board later and talk about margins in Oakland County and Macomb County. And that's really where this is going to be won and lost.
Yeah, Mike, we've said either way, this will make history tonight. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have to take another quick break, but thank you for staying with us as we continue this coverage as America decides. Be right back.
Thanks for sticking with CBS News Detroit tonight as America decides. I'm Shayna Humphreys.
And up here, it's Friday. Michigan's high-stakes Senate race is one of those races that is being watched very closely, really throughout the country. Democratic Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin is facing Republican former Congressman Mike Rogers. They are sharply opposed on several issues, including economic policy and the future of EVs.
Our Jack Springate is live at the Suburban Collection Showplace, where Mike Rogers is holding his watch party tonight. What's the latest there, Jack?
Well, there's a big round of applause right now as Christy Rogers was just up at the podium, but there's not a lot of other things for Rogers supporters to be optimistic about just yet, as Slotkin continues to command a heavy lead in this Senate race here in Michigan with the votes that have already been tallied. This is a room full of voters that would love to see Rogers return to Washington as a senator, having previously served as a congressman from Michigan. Some of the voters I've spoken to already say they believe in Rogers due to the time that he spent in D.C. Many of them also say they voted for him based on his stance on several social issues. Others say they felt a disconnect from Alyssa Slotkin based on her voting record since she's been in D.C., saying her focus seems to be more about voting along party lines and not what's in the best interest of Michiganders. Now, there's still a lot of votes to be tallied, and we'll be here all night to bring you those results from the Suburban Collection Showplace here in Novi. But for now, I'll send it back to y'all in the studio.
Thank you, Jack. And our coverage of this race continues with Michigan Dearborn professor Tim Kiska. Tim, what are you watching around the state to give you an idea as to how this might go tonight?
Oakland County, Oakland County, Oakland County. It's a very big deal. 4 years ago, you had 750,000 votes out there. And if Alyssa Slotkin is going to go to the Senate, she's going to have this county. Now, here's what we've got so far. I want to caution you on this 42% number. This is a little like seeing the Detroit Lions score. And we've got 42%. This could change. But she's well ahead. Joe Biden picked up 56% of the vote in Oakland County 4 years ago. That was major for her. Now, also, we've gotten some numbers in from Washtenaw County as well. And right now, that's where we are with about a third. She's picking up about 62% of the vote, which is a healthy lead, a little bit ahead of where Joe Biden was a few years ago, but that's where we are.
All right, the night is young. We'll see where it goes from here. Stay with us as America decides. We will have much more on the races that matter to you, and we'll be on the stream on the CBS News app and Pluto TV.